Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, 6 Easy Steps to Develop a Winning MSP Business Case. Some quick housekeeping. We had some great questions that we received through the registration that helped us build some of our content today, so thank you. If you have any other questions, please type them into the question box, and we will be able to answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar. If we do not get to yours, we will reach out to you directly after the webinar. If we want to get started, we can quickly go over the agenda.
Yeah.
We're just going to do some quick introductions of the people that are presenting today. Then we're going to go over what exactly is an MSP, why do you need an MSP, and then we'll give you 3 keys to building the business case and a couple of steps. We also will cover who your business case primary audience should be and setting the expectations and goals of what should be in your business case. We'll also go over creating the RFP, and then we'll also go over a client case study that we have here. And then at the end, we'll cover any questions that you have. We'll get started and introduce some of the speakers. We have Erin Fortunato. She's the VP of Enterprise Solutions Sales. She specializes in MSP account development. And we have Matt Rivera, who is the VP of Marketing. And Matt, you can go ahead and get started.
Great, thanks, Amy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. We're lucky to have Erin with us today. Erin is our expert on MSP engagements and has worked with many customers over the years. Erin, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Matt. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Great. So what we're going to talk about today is how you build the business case, which is kind of the first steps to getting an MSP going. And one thing I'll note is that we'll use MSP as it's denoted here and kind of interchangeably with managed staffing programs. So we're really talking about engaging with a provider, but really engaging in an MSP program for your contingent labor management. So let's start there. So how do you think about an MSP when you're describing what an MSP is to customers?
Sure. Well, Matt, I guess simply stated, an MSP or managed service provider is an operational program that manages your external workforce. So I mean, that's the high-level definition, right? But when people are trying to get their head around an MSP and whether they need an MSP or not, and kind of researching what it is and what options are, I actually like to use the analogy of a travel agent. I think it's a simplistic example of what an MSP can be, but think about a travel agent in your organization and think about individuals who are responsible for booking travel and traveling on behalf of the organization. And when you think about it, chances are individuals, when they're going through that process, they're not going to individual airline websites based on their preferences, maybe due to nonstops or due to frequent flyer programs, etc. They're actually going to either a portal or a travel desk, chances are, at your company, and from there, basically selecting options that are based upon the guardrails your company has set forth related to your travel policy. So it's similar in a way when you think about an MSP. An MSP is obviously a lot more complex because we're talking about human capital, which is, I think, in my opinion, one of the most important things at a company. But that's kind of an analogy I like to use for people to get their head around it. So an MSP, when you think about it, single point of contact, a program office, program desk, technology that facilitates the process, and then following the guidelines and rules around what your company has set forth in the engagement.
That's excellent. I think that's a great example too of how really one of the keys to this whole process, right, is kind of simplifying it and helping people understand what it is, right? So I think it's a great analogy for what it's like. So let's get right into it. We've only got about 30 minutes today. It's going to be quick, but we want to have time for questions at the end if we end up with a little bit of time. So let's get into some of the benefits and why, when you're talking about why we need an MSP, why somebody would need to manage this, Why don't you give us some of the main reasons you see and you when you talk to clients about why you need an MSP? What are the benefits?
Sure, yeah. So there are a couple that I'd like to highlight really here on this slide. And I'd say one of the number one drivers these days is really the risk mitigation. So, you know, there are so many different laws out there. By country, there are local laws, even within, you know, domestic within the U.S. You're talking about, you know, U.S.-wide laws, state laws, local laws even. So really, you know, having a provider that can bring consistency and manage that risk on your behalf is, you know, has significant value to your organization. In addition to that, there's risk around, you know, the background checking processes, right, and ensuring that those are followed, that individuals who are working on behalf of your organization and at your company in your buildings really need to have all gone through the same processes in terms of pre-screening. That leads right into another big benefit. A big driver is cost savings.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so first generation, typically we will mention that results can range from 10 to 30% depending on how much supplier optimization you've done independent of an MSP model up to this point. But that's, you know, definitely an area of opportunity. And then centralization is another big one, right? You get consolidated invoicing, you get, you know, one program management office that's, you know, looking after all of the process and all aspects of the program. And so there's, you know, obviously efficiencies gained and soft dollar cost gained from that process.
Excellent. You can see some of the other ones that you pointed out here that you gave us in this slide. So I think it's that's great to remember, you know, each of these, and their benefits might change, you know, from customer to customer, or even year to year in your company, which based on what you're doing. And the other thing I'd point out that we've talked about before is that big hand you see there with the thumbs up, which is hiring manager satisfaction. Also bringing in a program that, you know, can help increase the quality and the process around it, make it much less of a job for the hiring manager to get the talent they need to do their job, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that could be a, you know, another big one as we to think about as we go through. So let's start getting into the business case, right? That's why we're here. So we're going to spend a little bit of time, most of our short time together, talking about the business case itself. So these are important keys, and I think they frame, you know, all the other stuff we're going to talk about from here down. So why don't you give us kind of these big kind of three keys and tell us a little bit more about each one to help us kind of get in the groove of what we need to be thinking about with the business case.
Right. Okay, sure, we'll do. So first, and very important here, is really understanding your company's culture. So does your company historically have a culture of outsourcing versus insourcing? So for example, in that travel desk analogy that I used, you know, is that insourced? Is that, you know, do you manage that yourself, or do you have a third party managing that on your behalf? Another example could be, a simple example, it's a common example of outsourcing would be food services. So, you know, are you running the food service operations, canteens, cafes within your corporate buildings, or is that outsourced to a third party? So think about that, you know, so if you have a culture of outsourcing, an external MSP partner probably makes sense. If you have a culture of insourcing, you know, think through and that piece of it, and you know, some companies do employ an in-house MSP model that's run internally. The other thing you want to think about from a cultural perspective is, you know, are you a company that likes to work with high-touch service providers versus are you a company that wants to really have streamlined operational processes with, you know, very strict guardrails and really not a lot of exceptions in the middle there, because there are, you know, MSP providers out there that really kind of range in that spectrum of high touch to, you know, strict operational process and kind of everything in between. Another big element is dealing with change, and that'll be kind of a theme throughout this 30 minutes that while we're together. You know, that change is across the board. It's a big endeavor. Companies typically spend, you know, millions, sometimes even billions of dollars in external workforce. So, you know, it is, chances are, going to impact a large group within the organization. Involving key stakeholders is another big one, and we'll talk about this as well, but can't stress the importance of this enough. Engage your stakeholders first, identify who they are, engage them early, get them on board, and involve them throughout the process, because you're going to need them when you go live and operationalize the MSP.
Those are great points, and I think that you hit upon a couple of the big ones there for anybody who's creating this business case, right? But the other thing is, those who even may have a first-generation program or maybe thinking about changing their current program, right? You can still go back, and these are the important things and keys when you're reinforcing the program you have. How does it fit in our culture? Did we manage change well? Are we changing something else? And is it working? And if it's not working, it may be one of these factors, right? So always important to keep those things in mind when you're looking at your MSP program or thinking about starting one. So, all right, so we meant this to be, pretty instructive on how to get to the next steps of building the program, building the case study itself. So why don't you run us through what you've given us as the steps here, and we'll talk a little bit more about, the audience and the expectations of the audience as we go through. But let's kind of chart for our listeners the steps that you take and think about when you create that program.
Sure, sounds good. So the first step, if you're on this call today, chances are you have some semblance of data that's potentially gathered already. You have some idea that your company spends a significant amount of money on external workforce, and you're looking to potentially do something about that, right? I can't stress enough, though, the opportunity really here to really roll up your sleeves to the degree that you can, and realizing that first generation sometimes it's difficult. You're not going to necessarily find everything, but really gather all the data that you can so you understand your scope, and whether that is the types of some examples of the data points you want to look at. Obviously, overall spend, how that spend breaks down by country, how that spend breaks by line of business, so staff aug versus staff augmentation versus statement of work, independent contractors. Also, you want to understand who the big users are of the supply chain. You also want to understand, if possible, who your current suppliers are. How many, what percentage of the business do they have, what are their areas of specialization. So as much scope data as you can gather to help you in your internal presentation in developing the business case. We stressed this already, this key stakeholders. Really set out a chart for who you need to have on the team, and I would venture to say after you've gathered that data, there's probably high probability that IT is in there as a big user. Make sure you include them. If you're a company that uses manufactures products, you're probably going to have some plant managers in there that are big users. So to take a look at that, identify who that is. Of course, procurement and HR are almost always both in the mix, as well as other key executives. Understand basically what you want to accomplish. So what's motivating you to do this, and what do you hope to gain in the end? Again, change management is another piece, and you've got to anticipate what that's going to look like for your organization and who can help support that change management initiative. And an MSP is very helpful in supporting change management. There's a communication plan that an MSP will bring to bear and help you facilitate that. So identify what's in scope. Sometimes companies phase it out, so they do phase one. They do kind of what's common is contingent labor and independent contractors, for example. Phase two could be SOW, and you can look at that, from a U.S. perspective. Some companies look there first, and then look outside. But it really depends on where your spend and priorities are. And then the last step, and we'll talk more about this, is really building the RFP.
Right, and I think, and you alluded to it kind of there, and the scope is really important to understand what you're trying to accomplish and that scope to help build the RFP, and I will talk about that in a minute. So I think that's a great kind of segue into, if you understand the basic steps, right, let's talk a little bit about who we're going to talk to, who we could potentially be talking to, and it includes some of our key stakeholders. and those that will approve and support this business case, right?
Right.
So just tell us about your experience with the primary audience typically for something like this, for something like a business case for an MSP.
Yeah, okay, sure. So this slide really here depicts kind of from our vantage point, you know, what we see in working with companies as they're building their business case. And if you look at this slide, it's really showing who is ultimately making that like go, no-go decision, right? So you've gathered your data, you've done the steps, you're presenting to the team, but ultimately who is, you know, signing off on, yes, let's go forward and we are going to do this for our company. So it's a pretty even split really between, if you think about the SVP of HR, often involved and leading as the executive sponsor, and then procurement, CPO level, Chief Procurement Officer level, and then sometimes it is also a non-executive sponsor, but at a significant level within the organization. So VP, Senior Director that really has the empowerment to drive the initiative forward. And then about 11% of the time, we actually see the C-suite involved at the highest level making that decision. And, you know, I think that's just because it's contingent workforce and external workforce, it always ranks like in the top 5 of a commodity for a company, right? You think about it as it's labor, it's payroll, it's always a large expense, and so often that C-suite will want to be involved.
Excellent. I think that's really good to keep in mind, especially as we go into our next slide here, which is, you know, those expectations for how this is going to go, right? So we talked about change management, we talked about scope, and these two kind of come together, I think, in this slide a little bit, which is talking about some of, you know, the things that are important to not only that could be that executive that's helping you kind of sell this and move it along, and also your key stakeholders. So what are some of those considerations and expectations and things to think about, some of these that are key in your mind?
Yeah, so one of the big questions, and this is often front of mind for individuals who are in a procurement role, is vendor neutrality, right? So often, you know, procurement really wants to see a, you know, competitive bidding scenario basically at the requisition level each and every time, right? Facilitating that competitive environment, ensuring that you're getting the best price. So that's something to think through, right? And doesn't necessarily have to be one size fits all, right? There could be a significant element of your program that is vendor neutral, right? But then if and where it makes sense, for example, in like a light industrial environment, you may want to have a hybrid model where you have 1 or 2 preferred vendors that really have a lot of skin in the game and, you know, can align on a local level with the plants. And in that hybrid I described, that's still, you know, under the MSP management and umbrella. Another thing to think through, and, you know, human resources will think about this as well as the users, will be how are the current suppliers going to react. We need business continuity from their perspective, and you know, they don't want any impact to that at all. And so you know, really it's working through ensuring that they're going to have, you know, high quality supply chain, there will be business continuity, and just, you know, walking them through the change management and what to expect in that.
Yep, and I think that these are good to keep in mind as we go through, you know, that creating the business case, and have you set expectations, and what expectations have been set. It goes along with your culture too. And that brings us to, I think, what is probably a very important slide, right? So at some point you're going to sit down and kind of make the case, right? So tell us, you know, how that meeting could go and what you'd want to get across in that case.
Right, okay. So I actually love this slide. I honestly feel like this could be, for those on the call who are in the process of building a business case or about to build a business case, I actually think that this could be your agenda essentially for your PowerPoint deck that you're going to build to have this conversation with leadership. So, you know, we can just walk through the different topics here. So answer the whys. Why are we doing this? Why do we need to do this? I would suggest first maybe set the stage with some industry-specific benchmarking. So Staffing Industry Analyst is a good resource for that. We've actually, based on our relationship with SIA, that's the acronym for Staffing Industry Analyst, have provided this type of data to clients who are working to build their business case. And as we've supported them in this endeavor. But start there, let them see, what's happening out there in the marketplace, according to size and scope of companies similar to yours. And then I would then start to paint a picture of your landscape and what it looks like and what goals you want to see in accomplishing, an implementation of an MSP. So again, that leads right into the second topic. So second agenda item really would be painting a clear picture of current state. And that's, when we talked about gathering the data, it ties back to that. So again, scope, what it looks like today, spend by country, lines of business, suppliers. So paint that picture and also paint the picture of, how the requisition process happens today. How are they procuring services SOWs versus, contingent labor? And chances are there's a lot of individuals at the manager level just calling, suppliers that they have relationships with individually. So kind of paint all those pictures of those multiple points from A to B that are happening all over. And then state your intentions. So what will change? So what does it look like today? In the future, what does that model look like? And paint that for the audience. And again, that ties right into future state. So once it's up and running, what does it look like? Single point of contact, program office, supporting the overall organization. And then results, what can we expect? So I would talk a little bit in this section about, the phasing and how long it will take. I would also, talk about, some of the things that we mentioned and some of the goals, so cost savings, risk mitigation, operational efficiencies, and then resources and timing. So you definitely want to set the stage early for who you will need to support you in a rollout of an MSP program. So get that executive sponsorship bought in right up front and, be upfront about what types of resources you will need and the time that those individuals. And again, I mentioned, SIA has some data. We have data as well in terms of industry, but we've also helped companies build their specific business cases, and we have template and examples that we can share if interested.
Great, and that's those resources and things that are out there are important to take advantage of. One thing we wanted to touch on, we're getting close to about 5 or 6 minutes left, so we'll kind of speed through these next ones, but you'll have these in the slide deck and available anytime from us. But just hit a couple of quick points on, creating, and common sense is really the key words here. Right. Common sense RFP. What's kind of top of mind for the RFP?
Yeah, absolutely. So top of mind so this is, think in terms of the supplier and what they want to see, right, when they're receiving your RFP, because ultimately you want a quality response back. We talked a lot about presenting that scope. Give them as much detail as possible around that so they can really understand what it's going to take to run an MSP, and that you get a custom response versus boilerplate, right?
Yep.
So that's important. Also think through your sourcing strategy. So, are you going to just go to RFP for MSP and let the MSP work with you to identify the VMS provider? Or some companies simultaneously go MSP, VMS at the same time, and VMS stands for Vendor Management System.
That's the technology.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Right. A lot of acronyms.
Right.
Yeah.
We like our acronyms in the staffing business. So that's great. I think those are great tips for anybody looking at this. So we have a little bit of a case study, and we're getting down to the end here. So why don't you give us just kind of a quick, maybe 1 minute overview of like why this is important, what happened here, what's kind of the main like a headline out of this case study when you think about it?
Sure, yeah, everyone on call can kind of read through the details, but I'd like to talk about this company and this MSP program that Yo currently has in place today, because I really think of it as it was really a journey. It still is a journey, right? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of companies some have the capacity to kind of boil the ocean, if you will, like big bang and implement everything all at once. That's not as practical for other companies, right, as they're working through change management and they really want a partner to go on the journey with them.
Yep.
So this particular program really was that journey. So we started out with U.S.-based contingent labor, independent contractors. That was really phase one. There were admittedly a few outliers that were intentionally left out initially because they were groups that really needed more care and feeding after the business case and the program was operationalized, was built out.
Yep.
Then we tucked that in right after we proved the case. Then from there we looked at, of course, what's next, right? So the statement of work was next. So services and project statement of work came under the program, and then from there, what was the next step? So third phase was really international within this partnership, and that was really incorporating EMEA and that operation under the model.
So great. So I think the point there for everybody is it's absolutely a journey, and you got to look at look at it that way, and it really helps, especially when you're creating that scope. So as we're getting down to our final thing, our final couple of things here on our agenda, which is we have other MSP content available to you if necessary, and we can always help you with that. I do want to get to at least one quick question here. We had a few come in, but we'll get to one and then we'll wrap up. So let me ask you this question that we got from someone in the audience. What suggestions can you offer when getting buy-in from IT? So IT seems to be kind of a question, and sometimes you get the IT's different and we're not in the program. How do you respond to that when that comes up as part of creating the program or even the business case?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. That's actually a really common scenario. There are many programs out there that I can think of today that are up and running MSPs, but IT for some reason is kind of a carve out, and they're doing their own thing. So that's a really good question. So I guess what my advice in a minute or less would be to really think of that challenge from the IT department's perspective. So empathize, put yourself in that manager's shoes, and why are they different? Why are they special? Well, chances are they're a big user, number one. Number two, I mean, they really are performing mission functions for the organization, right? And chances are they, more than anyone else in a way, they need a partner to align with them that really understands their business, really understands their drivers, and they have long-term relationships with a lot of these suppliers. So from that perspective, you think, well, what can we do to engage them? And I think you really need to sell the benefit of having the best supply chain possible. So that can mean the suppliers that they have today can be incorporated under the program, but that could also be augmented with other proven suppliers so that they're really getting the best of the best in terms of the talent. If that's what it's all about for them, they want top talent, whether it's a staff aug scenario or SOW scenario for their engagements.
That's great. And I think really what you hit on there, right, is knowing your audience, right? Is making sure that you're hitting what's important to them. And I think you said that. So I think throughout this, that's kind of been one of the underlying factors with our key stakeholders and knowing and making sure that you're managing change and those key expectations. So Erin, you've been a great help today. We appreciate it. Erin's available to anybody on the line if you'd like to talk to Erin or you have a question for her. We're out of time for today. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you got some great information out of it, and we'd be happy to help you with anything further. So thanks, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yep, and everybody have a good day, good afternoon.